Hey, Larken Rose here. I recently did a video about socialism and communism. And as expected, there was some back and forth in the comments afterwards, and it inspired me to do another video. Now, a lot of people, first of all, communism and socialism are defined differently, but at their essence, they're the same thing. It's the idea that the collective, the common good, basically should outrank the rights of the individual, that it's okay to sacrifice the I for the greater good. There's a direct quote of Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's minister of propaganda, saying that socialism is all about sacrificing the I to the thou and sacrificing the individual to the common good, to the collective. Pretty good summary. And by the way, people like Mao and Stalin and said very similar things. So there is sort of a technical distinction, but it's kind of fake anyway, because they're both based on collectivism. Some people sort of talk as if communism/socialism is just sort of a economic theory. It's just, well, we think that if we arrange things this way, it might work better. It might be more fair or whatever. But it isn't. So I wanted to make this video to point out three examples, the three most obvious, if you ask me, of ways in which communists and socialists aren't merely mistaken economically, though they are definitely that. They are immoral and they are dishonest in their terminology. In fact, the main terms they focus on and the main dogma and rhetoric that they repeat over and over again is inherently dishonest and essentially meaningless. So I'm going to break this video into three little parts. It'll be one video, but you can skip to different parts if you want. The first has to do with the concept of means of production, which doesn't mean anything. The second part has to do with the communist distinction between private property and personal property, which doesn't mean anything. It's arbitrary and meaningless, just like means of production. And the third has to do with the way they talk about doing away with all hierarchy, in which case they're always completely intellectually dishonest as well. So that's why I'm calling this Commie Hogwash. It isn't just that their theories don't work on a practical basis, it's that they're not even honest about their own theories. They have to do this manipulative, deceptive BS to try to pitch something that's inherently nonsensical and immoral. So let us begin with the concept of the means of production, because the famous socialist thing is, well, it's about the workers seizing the means of production. Okay, what the hell does that mean? Well, it's the stuff that gets used to be able to produce goods that you can sell to other people. Oh, so like this? Because hands can be used to produce stuff. Well, no, not hands. A hammer? A shovel? Well, no, kind of, sort of, but no, not really that. Essentially, the phrase, the means of production, the entire purpose of making up that phrase was an excuse for a bunch of entitlement mentality parasites to steal factories, to violently take over factories. But you can't just say, well, we get to just steal whatever we want, because most people will go, well, that's kind of bogus and bad and immoral and destructive, and that's not going to go well. So they literally had to go, we need to think of a phrase that's going to describe specifically the sorts of things we want to steal right now in a way that'll sort of make this sound like a principle, like it has some actual foundation in logic or reason, and it isn't just us arbitrarily wanting to steal some stuff. Well, that's all it is. It's them arbitrarily wanting to steal some stuff. And if you try to define the means of production in any clear, succinct, or rational way, it's utterly impossible. Like I said, it includes hands and shovels, and now it includes laptops. And like a lot of the work I do, a lot of the work that a lot of people do is just on a computer. Well, that's now the means of production. So do you, the worker, get to just steal somebody's laptop so you can produce stuff? Because that was their excuse. That was their complaint against capitalism is, hey, you own the thing that we use to make stuff. In that case, they're talking about a factory. And we should magically be entitled to it for some reason, even though we didn't buy it. Like, we, the workers who worked in this factory, never mind that it's not ours, we didn't buy it, we incurred none of the risk in buying it or starting the business. We think we should just be able to take over the factory and steal the stuff that's used to make stuff. And then we get to own the factory, and then we get the profits. That's their excuse. But if you actually try to give any definition of the means of production that is a definition, you fail. A definition, by definition, I'm going to give the definition of definition, is a thing that distinguishes something from everything else. It defines it. So how would you define the means of production in a way that distinguishes it from everything else? You can't. It's totally impossible. Hands, a shovel, a pen, a laptop. Well, no, we mean factories. Okay, where? Where's that magic line? First of all, you didn't say factories, you said the means of production. So let's say I'm going to build a little shed in my backyard. Are you allowed to steal it yet? No, that's just a shed. Okay, cool, just checking. I'm going to build like a wooden bench. Are you allowed to steal it yet? No, that's just your bench. Okay, I'm going to maybe get a vise on it and buy like a handsaw and hammer and a power drill. Are you allowed to steal it yet? No, we're not quite sure, because I can make some stuff just using that. I could make chairs and tables. Not that they'd be that great. I'm not that good a carpenter. But I could already use my tiny little factory to make stuff. Just me and some tools that I bought. How is that not the means of production? And where is the distinction between that and, well, now I have a bigger thing and, you know, I buy in bulk from the lumber yard and I do this and I have bigger power tools and now I have a circular saw and a table saw and a this, that, and the other thing and a big clamps to hold things up and now I can build bigger and bigger things. And at what point does it suddenly go, pa-ting, now it's the means of production. Now I have no rightful claim to any of it. Suddenly it went from the stuff that was rightfully mine that I used to make stuff to now the workers, whoever the hell that is, have the right to come steal it. Not even share it with me, but forcibly evict me from my shed, however big it got when it suddenly turned into the means of production, steal all the tools and use it to produce chairs, tables, whatever they're going to make. Where do you draw the line? You don't, and you can't possibly. And it's interesting because very simple lines of questioning can very quickly show that every socialist and every communist is an absolute and complete liar about what he believes. And a very common example I use is, okay, Mr. Socialist, Mr. Commie, whichever one you label yourself as, let's say you and I are on a big island. There's fresh water, there's lots of resources, there's trees, there's food, there's all that. So we're not like battling over the last bite of food. And you spend the day making a hut, and I spend the day making a bow and arrow. And I go to the stream, and I go, there are fish, freshwater fish in the stream. And so I learned that, hey, I can use my bow and arrow to hunt fish in the stream. So at the end of the day, you have a hut, I don't, but I have a bow and arrow and some fish. And you say, oh, yeah, can I have some fish? And I was like, well, I mean, I had to work pretty hard to make this bow. But I'll tell you what, you can borrow my bow and arrow that took me hours to make. Had to try a few times because the bow kept breaking and the vines would snap and stuff. Finally made one that actually works. You can borrow it with the agreement that whatever you catch will split 50-50. So if you get one fish, we'll chop it in half. If you get two, we each get a fish. Does that work? Oh yeah, is there anything immoral or oppressive about me offering you that deal? Well, the thing is, if you're going to be a consistent communist or socialist, you already have to pretend that I'm oppressing you because I am doing exactly what they condemn. I am using capital, my bow and arrow that is mine. offering to let you do all the labor. I'm going to sit on my butt recovering from working all day. You're going to go to the stream, do all the labor of catching the fish, and I'm going to get some of the profits. Am I evil and exploitive for offering that deal? All of them at first say no, and then I point out, well, good. You just gave the capitalist answer. You accepted capitalism and you denied socialism by obviously saying, no, you're not entitled to the means of production just because you exist. It wouldn't be okay for you to just steal my bow because you need some fish. Which, okay, there's a little bit of hope in that they always answer that. But then they see where it's going. Well, no, because, and they try to make up completely artificial distinctions. And then I'll say, like, okay, you have a hut. What if I say, I'll trade you some of the fish I caught if I can, like, stay in your hut if it rains? Like, is that immoral? Am I oppressing you by offering you that deal? Am I entitled to your hut that you took all the time and effort to make because I need it? Well, it's starting to rain, so need, to each according to his need. Am I entitled to your hut? Well, no. And they say, well, I might share it. Okay, I didn't ask if you're going to be nice and share it. I was asking, am I entitled to it? Is it your choice anymore? Just like I might just say, yeah, you can use my bow, try not to break it. Or I might say, you can use my bow if I get half of what you catch. Is it mine to decide whether I let you use it, or are you entitled to it because of your need? And invariably, they will start with the only rational moral answers there can be, which is, of course it's your bow, you made it. Of course it's okay to offer a trade where, like, I can borrow it in exchange for this. And I could say, I'll let you use my bow, but I get, for every 10 fish you catch, I get 9 of them. And you can say, no, that deal sucks. I'm going to, like, go make my own. Did I oppress you by offering you sort of a crummy deal that you didn't take? No, that was already the situation you were in. You didn't have a bow anyway. I'd offered you a crummy deal and you could go, no, that's a crummy deal. But it's mine. And if you accept that it's mine, I get to decide what deal I offer. So to pretend that there's any line, any rational principle between that and we're going to steal a huge factory is just insane. If anything, it gets worse and worse as the thing gets bigger because there's more and more invested and it took more and more to create a bigger and bigger, like my shop, my shed. It's like, well, now I have a bunch of machines and I have a bunch of people working for me. Well, you're exploiting them because they generate enough stuff that when you sell it, you make a profit on top of what you paid them. Yeah, so that's me enslaving you, and now you have the right to steal my shop because we made a voluntary deal where I said we can combine my stuff with your labor, make some money, and ahead of time we will agree you get this much for the work you do, and I get this much for the fact that it's my stuff and I built it or I bought it or whatever. What part of that is oppressive? The only sane answer is no part of that is oppressive. And at no point do you magically become entitled to the stuff it takes to actually generate that. So means of production doesn't mean anything. It is a term that is impossible to define. The entire purpose of that term was so socialists could try to justify and pretend it's some philosophical position, try to justify stealing what wasn't theirs to enrich themselves at the expense of the people who had it before and kicking them out or killing them or whatever, depending on how much they're pretending to be voluntary about it. Now, some socialists will say, well, you're talking about state socialism. We just want, voluntary socialism. Okay, now my first question to them is always this. If you're doing your voluntary socialism thing over there, and I have my shed and my workshop and my bench and however many tools I acquired so far, are you going to make me play your game? Or are you going to let me do what I want with what's mine? Because if you let me do what I want, that's capitalism. You deciding to arrange your trades and interactions with other people in a certain way doesn't describe the economic system. You're describing a system that is capitalist. It's free market, and you just happen to decide to try to do things cooperatively with, whatever setup you want. To be an actual socialist, you would come seize my means of production. And in one of the exchanges under the last video, I had just this, as often happens with collectivists, it just became absurd because I said, well, if I have the means of production, what happens? He's like, oh no, the workers will have the means of production. It's like, well, why? How do we get to there? If I built a thing and it's mine, are you going to steal it? And half the time he's pretending, oh no, I wouldn't force anything. Okay, cool. In other words, the workers won't seize the means of production. They'll just say, can we have it? And I'll say, no, you can trade. We can do the free trade thing. And then he basically said, well, you would voluntarily give it over. No, I won't. And then you get into this weird terminology that you actually saw in the Soviet Union and in Red China, where they're like, oh, the common good and the collective, and each will contribute to blah, blah, blah. No, you're either going to force me or you're not going to get your way, because I'm not going to play the stupid socialist game. So which is it going to be? Are you going to allow me in freedom, in which case you're not a socialist? That's just how you would choose on your own to interact with other people, but you're allowing a free market. Or you're going to be violent, in which case don't pretend you're an anarchist, because whatever central mechanism you use to force this, that's government, whether you want to call it that or not. It's a violent, authoritarian thing that's forcing your master plan onto everybody. So that's number one. Means of production means absolutely nothing. It's a made-up term that has no rational definition, never has, never will, never could. It's just crap they use to try to justify stealing stuff and taking over stuff that doesn't belong to them, and that's all. Second term serves the same purpose and is just as dishonest. Their distinction between private property and personal property. And whenever you bring it up, they're like, well, you'll be able to have like your own toothbrush. Often they literally use toothbrush as an example. It's like, wow, this sounds like a super prosperous society if the thing that jumps to your mind of the thing I'm allowed to keep for myself is a toothbrush. Wow. But some of them will say, oh, no, you'll still have like your car and your house. And some of them say, no, you won't. They're already demonstrating just among themselves that the term doesn't mean anything. Because where the hell do you draw the line? And based on what? How are you defining what counts as what you need, your personal needs? Who the hell defines that? It doesn't mean anything. Need by itself means absolutely nothing. For need to mean anything, you need an in order to phrase. Now, sometimes the in order to phrase implied is in order to stay alive. You need food. Well, no, we could put you in a box and you wouldn't have food. The world would keep right on turning. You would die. You need food to not die. Okay, that's a complete thought. But to say, well, I need affordable health care. No, you don't. I need clean water. No, you don't. I need decent housing. No, you don't. If the need is in order to be alive, pretty much a cardboard box and some cabbage, that covers most of your needs. Is that the state of existence that you're saying you're entitled to and everything else is private property which must be abolished? They can't say. They can never define it. Because what it boils down to is private property is the term they use for shit they want to steal from other people, and personal property is the term they use for shit they don't want other people to steal from them. That is the only distinction. That is the only meaning those terms have ever had when spewed by the commies. It's no more complicated than that. Because they don't even define it anywhere near the same between each other. Like when they're talking to each other, they randomly make up different lines of what they're going to count as private property. And I can go through the similar lines of questioning. Well, if I build a hut, is that mine? Well, yeah, well, sort of. Well, what if somebody needs it? I mean, the whole motto of communism, from each according to his ability to each according to his need. Well, if you need a hut, doesn't that make it yours? And at that level, most of them sort of backtrack and don't actually argue the communist position, because then it sounds as evil and insane as it is. They don't want to say, yeah, I know you spent all day building that hut and I just sat on my butt, but now it's raining, so I'm entitled to it. And I therefore have the right to do anything, including using violence, to get it, because it's rightfully mine because of my need. So they don't usually try to argue it at that level when the questions are that simple, even though if they were going to be consistent, they already would be. But, well, how big does it have to get before suddenly they're entitled to some of it? How much, if I make 2 bows and arrows, are they entitled to one of them? I can't use both at once. So are they entitled to the fruits of my labor? Well, you can only use one at once, so we're going to steal the other one. If I build 2 huts, and some of them will argue this, that, hey, you can only live in one. This one you're not in right now, so it's fair game for anybody who finds it. Some communists argue that, and some argue against it, because they can't possibly define it, because there is no way to define it. There is no distinction between private property and personal property. And sometimes they'll say, well, personal property is just sort of the things you use in your everyday life. Okay, computer, keyboard, car, truck, heavy equipment. Like, kind of depends who you're talking about, what they use in their everyday life. But they say, well, we're talking about land when we mean private property. And the funny thing is, only half of them say we're talking about land when we talk about private property. The other half include cars and stuff. So they haven't even agreed among themselves what stuff they're allowed to steal and which stuff they're not. So you can imagine how great that system is going to work when the proponents of it don't even agree with each other what they have the right to possess and have for themselves. So, which is why it always collapses and falls apart. But even when they say, oh no, it's just about land ownership because you didn't have the right to build. Okay, so I build a hut. It's on some land. Do you have the right to come along and say, well, yeah, the hut's yours, but the land underneath it isn't, so move your hut? Like, if you're claiming I can't own land, doesn't it sort of follow that you have the right to kick me off the land and tell me to move my hut somewhere else because you feel like building there? How well is that going to work? About as well as Red China worked under Mao. So it's another term that doesn't mean anything. Private property versus personal property is a completely arbitrary, meaningless distinction. And the sole purpose of them using that term at all is literally an excuse for them to steal what they want and an excuse to not have other people steal what they don't want stolen from them. That's all. That's the only meaning it has ever had. The final thing I'm going to mention, it's not the final thing they're dishonest about. They're dishonest about almost everything. But the final one I'm going to mention here, the third one, is the concept of hierarchy. Because some of them say, to be a real anarchist, you have to be against all hierarchy, which is stupid. Because hierarchy doesn't equal ruling class. Ruling class means authoritarian, coercive control. It doesn't mean any voluntary arrangement of people that happens to sort of be a hierarchy. For example, there I am in my little shed with a few tools making chairs, and somebody comes along and I say, hey, I have all this equipment and I have more tools than I can use at any given time. If you wanted to come work here and help me make chairs and tables and stuff, then I can pay you a certain amount or give you a certain percentage of the profits of what we make from selling chairs and tables to people. Do you want to do that? You can say no, like I'm not conscripting you to do it. I'm offering you, here's what I would pay you. So if you accept it, to pretend that I'm exploiting you is ridiculous. All I did was offer you an extra option in your life that you're allowed to say, no, I'm going to stick with what I already had. Okay, you have every right to do that. I'm not going to force you into it. Or you can go, yeah, I think that'll be worth it. I'll do the trade. Okay, guess what? That's a hierarchy. If you're complaining about hierarchy, you have to already pretend that despite the fact that it's my shed and my stuff and my tools, the fact that he's like, yeah, I'll work for you, and now all of a sudden I'm as much the boss as you are, and I own this as much as you do, and I own all the tools, because we have to be equals. Because me saying, okay, today we're going to make some chairs and we'll do this. And if you work on the leg structure, I'll do this. No, because then I'm an evil, oppressive exploiter boss who's just forcing you, actually not at all forcing you, just inviting you to do certain particular work for which I will pay you. With part of the deal being, well, you have to do the work that I want you to do in my shop. You can't come here and basket weave in my carpenter shop and expect me to pay you. That's not what the deal was. But if you're following my instructions, by definition, that's a hierarchy. Well, when they come along and say there will be no hierarchies, one, that's insane, and two, they're always hypocritical. The reason it's insane is you literally can't accomplish anything of any sophistication without a hierarchy. I'm tempted to start with like the example of a cell phone or a car. Try a bicycle. We'll start with a bicycle. The technology's been around forever. Technology is very simple. Lots of people understand that. Do you think you could make, and I've actually challenged a bunch of commies, I want to see the first communist bicycle. You start from scratch. You start with dirt. You don't get to use the metal that was already like mined and processed by the profit system. Start in a system where there's no hierarchy, there's no money, there's no private ownership of anything, there's no trade or profit motive, and nobody's in charge. And make a bicycle. Ready, go. Never in a million years would you see a bicycle as a result of that. If somebody goes, look, I have this design and it goes like this, what do you think? He's the designer. If everybody goes, yeah, let's follow that, you already created a hierarchy. You already put yourself under, that's the plan, we will follow that plan to make that thing. So put the blueprint on the wall and we'll like measure it and we'll make the parts for it. That's a hierarchy. It's already a hierarchy. Whereas if you say, all right, we're making a bicycle, there won't be a plan, because that would be oppressive and exploitive and hierarchical. Everybody just randomly start putting shit together and we'll see if we end up with a bicycle. I'll give you a hint. You won't ever end up with a bicycle. You'll end up with a bunch of, in fact, you won't even get to the point of having metal you can do anything with. You'll have dirt. If you're lucky, you'll have a pile of dirt with some iron ore mixed in there with all of you looking at it going, oh, I don't know what to do. You can't do anything without hierarchy. Library? Nope. Football team? Nope. Little tiny shop with 2 people working in it? Nope. Can't even do that. The bow and arrow thing? Nope. That's already a hierarchy. Because the guy who owns the bow and arrow is in charge of the bow and arrow, and he gets to decide what deal he's willing to offer. The other guy gets to decide whether he's going to take the deal. So that's the reason it's insane to oppose voluntary hierarchy. It's also ridiculous to pretend that the word anarchy means no hierarchy. It means no rulers. Rule by no one, not arrangement by no one, not cooperation by no one, and not hierarchy by no one. But here's why it isn't just insane, it's completely hypocritical. The entire concept of communism and socialism is an economic master plan. This is how everything's going to work. This is how ownership will be determined. This is how, according to who? The committee, that's a hierarchy. The guy in charge, that's a hierarchy. The majority vote, that's a hierarchy. Unless literally every single person agrees on every single detail, and there is zero chance of that ever happening, you already have a hierarchy. It's the worst, most inefficient, unproductive, mangled, stupid hierarchy imaginable, but it's still a hierarchy. And so when they have this master plan, here's how everything will be handled, need will be determined, and there'll be votes, and the committee, and blah, 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 but no hierarchy. You just described a giant master plan hierarchy and tried to include in there no hierarchy. And by the way, that's why you get the spectacle of something like the Soviet Union or Red China, violently oppressive, tens of millions of people starving to death. Oh, they didn't do it right. They made it authoritarian with a hierarchy. Well, gee whiz, that's because you believe in a master plan that's supposed to make everybody interact in a certain way. And the difference is in the free market, all it's based on is you're recognizing the self-ownership of every other person. So I can look at a bunch of collectivists and go, hey, if you want to do a commune over there in a collective, I'm not going to interfere. You do what you want. I don't think it's going to go well because laws of human nature and economics are still going to kick you in the butt. But hey, if you can pull it off, be my freaking guest. Because the concept of freedom is the only concept that is not an imposed master plan. It's actual freedom where you let people decide how they're going to interact with other people. Communism and socialism aren't that. They're a description about how all resources and all property will be used or distributed or however you want to put it. So of course, what's going to happen every single frickin' time is some person, some committee, something or other is going to end up being the ones who say, we're the ones who decide need and what the workers have a right to take and what counts as the means of production and what counts as private property versus personal property and who needs what and will vote on who can get what. That's an authoritarian hierarchy. And the idea that somehow you could get this global master plan of economic stupidity applied to all of the human race without a hierarchy or authoritarian control is ridiculous. And when I actually ask communists or people who call themselves anarcho-communist, well, how's that going to work? Like, because I'm not going along with this willingly. I think your plan is colossally stupid. I won't interfere with you trying it with as many other people as want to try it voluntarily. I'll keep a safe distance, but I'm not playing that game. What are you going to do about that? And then their two choices are to be an actual voluntarist or anarcho-capitalist and tell me, okay, you can do things your way. We're going to try our thing over here. Okay, that's fine. I don't care how you decide to trade what is yours. Do whatever you want. You know, reality may not give you the result you were hoping for, but I'm not the thing that's going to come interfere with it. Or you can choose the actual commie mentality, which is that your need entitles you to the fruits of my labor and everybody else's, in which case you're not going to leave me alone. You're going to seize the means of production, the socialist thing, or from each according to his ability, to each according to his need, the communist thing. Either way, you're claiming the right to the fruits of other people's labor. And then you see these bizarre mental gymnastics of socialists and communists saying, well, no, everybody would choose it. What if I don't? And some will literally say, unironically, well, then you would be re-educated until you see that, good Lord, how could you type or say those words and not recognize why the Soviet Union and North Korea and Red China and all those other places turned into the disasters they turned into? Oh, there'll be no hierarchy or authority, but we will re-educate anyone who doesn't voluntarily go along with our global master plan of how all property and all resources will be distributed and managed. It's ridiculous. And the thing is, that is why they're dishonest about all these terms and everything they say. Because if they were actually honest, everybody would recognize that's evil and insane. In addition to, it would never work in a million years. It's also evil and insane and hypocritical. So they have to hide it under all these ridiculous euphemisms and terms that don't mean anything, are impossible to define, can't define need, can't define private property versus personal property, can't define means of production, can't define what counts as a hierarchy that you're going to allow and what counts as a hierarchy you're not going to allow. Can't make any distinction between anything, because when I do my bow and arrow thing where there's literally two people and one thing, one physical item, a bow and arrow, they already disagree with each other about how to handle that. And every time I have to point out, okay, so in an equation that involves one physical object, well, two if you count the bow and arrow separately, one object and two people, your awesome philosophy, you can't figure out exactly how that would apply to two people with one object, but it's okay because it'll definitely work when applied to 7 billion people and everything on Earth. Yeah, that's freaking genius. So yeah, You will never find a communist who is honest about what he believes, who argues anything rational or coherent or even internally consistent, or actually has a moral position. Because the only way for them to actually be moral is for them to get to the position where they say, well, me and some people I know may try to arrange things this way, but we'll leave you alone if you want to do things another way. That's the free market. That's voluntarism. That's self-ownership. Cool, works for me. I won't interfere with you if you don't interfere with me. But that's not communism. That's you making certain choices for yourself and allowing other people to make their own choices based on private ownership. Because self-ownership is the foundation of rightful ownership of everything else. I made the bow, so it's mine. Because my time and effort was combined with resources nobody was using. Now it's mine. Just like you put in your time and effort and build a hut, that hut is yours. And to not accept that first step, to say that, no, the fact that you made it doesn't make it yours. If I need it, it's mine. Even though that would be the consistent position for them to take, almost none of them admit that that would be the consistent position for them to take, because everyone would recognize them as immoral, violent, stupid animals and nothing more. Because that's the mentality of an animal. Oh, I need that. It's mine. I have the right to do whatever it takes to get it because it's rightfully mine because I need it. And all I need it means is I want it. Okay? That's going to collapse into violence immediately. So most of them pretend, well, no, you're allowed to have a toothbrush, maybe a bow and arrow and a hut, but at some arbitrary point, suddenly we're entitled to something. You won't know ahead of time because we don't even agree with each other what the hell we're talking about. But don't worry, at some point, the good of the collective will make it so we're allowed to come steal your shit. That is the foundation of collectivism, whether you call it socialism or communism or anything else. It's insane, it's hypocritical, it's always dishonest, it's always immoral. So ye frickin' ha, and all the people who think we're being progressive and loving and caring and it's all about sharing and helping your fellow man. No, it's about none of that. It's about being a stupid, violent animal. That's what communism has always been about. Hate to break it to all of you who are falling for the feel-good rhetoric that it's been hidden under. Look at the feel-good rhetoric that came before Red China and the Soviet Union and North Korea. Look in their constitutions. Read the preambles to all their constitutions. They're like, wow, this sounds so lovely. Everybody's equal. Everybody will be fed. The state will make sure everybody has blah, blah, blah. Then look at the outcome and you'll see the reality of the heart and soul of collectivism. And you'll see how horrendously anti-human it really is.